Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with Michael Browning, and we're just going to have a chat today about the music business and how the music business has changed. I've been in the music business at this point for like 20 years, off and on in different degrees and in different capacities. And Michael's been in the business as well. So why don't we start by you could tell us a little bit about your musical background, and then I'll reiterate mine. People are always shocked that they're like, "What's with the nails?" I'm like, "I'm a classical guitarist, among
Yeah,
other things." So
yeah,
that's why I have fingernails.
yeah. Tickling the nylon.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah, it's kind of interesting with me. I'm from a really small town in southern West Virginia, and actually, my introduction into music, my earliest memories of recognizing melody and rhythm was traveling around with my dad. He used to sing in churches all the time. My brother and I would travel with my dad, my mom, and in addition to that, though, my dad was a metalhead. He was really into metal. So my brother and I were listening to Sabbath and Zeppelin on vinyl when we were like 7 and 8 years old. So that kind of grew. We were really big fans of music, and my brother actually got a guitar first. So he was like 12, 13 when he got a guitar. And within like the first 6 months, he was learning like Rust in Peace riffs. So I kind of felt like I needed to play catch up. And for
Yeah.
me, I always, for me, the beats and the rhythms in songs is what resonated with me. I love melody, but the rhythm is really what resonated with me. So I'm always tapping my feet. I was really interested in the rhythm of these songs. So eventually, my mom and my grandma got together and they bought me my first drum set. And my brother and I started a little two-piece at 14, 15 years old. And as luck would have it, our best friend down the street, his name was Chuck, he was so inspired by it. And he's always been kind of a hermit. He was so inspired by it, he decided he wanted to try to learn bass because that's kind of, none of us can sing, but what's the other thing he can do? And it was bass. So he decided to get a bass, and he kind of cracked out of his shell. And we started this little three-piece called Power Assassin on a little street in Gary, West Virginia. So sometimes I feel like the luckiest person in the world that we grew up the street. I mean, it's a lot of times finding a fellow bandmate and someone that you can make something work with is kind of a task. And I'm sure you've got experience with that as well.
Well, I mean, the guys in Black Sabbath went to high school together.
Yeah, you get
Originally,
lucky sometimes.
they were iffy on Ozzy Osbourne joining the band because they're like, well, they used to stuff him into lockers and stuff.
Yeah,
they were so like, are we gonna have this guy in the band? He's kind of a dweeb.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of Black Sabbath, the album Heaven and Hell turns 40 today. So it's 40 years ago today that album was released. It was actually, I think it was their first #1 record in the UK. They hadn't had one. It was with their first one with Ronnie James Dio on vocals, and it's actually, I think, my favorite heavy metal record. So that one's 40 years old today, which is great.
That's an awesome time to do the stream there. That's perfect.
Yeah. The Van Halen brothers actually kind of started off the same way you did, except they switched. So originally Eddie played drums and his brother Alex played guitar, and they just decided they liked each other's instruments better and just switched.
Yeah.
And then they just kept doing the band, and they didn't want to call the band Van Halen. Originally, it was called Mammoth. But David Lee Roth actually suggested they call it Van Halen because he thought it sounded cool.
Yeah.
And so when it was time for him to leave the band, it's like, well, dude, your name's not even in the, it's our name in the band.
Yeah, we're good. No big deal.
That reminds me of another thing. So I talk about this in the new book. Sammy Hagar, in order to join Van Halen, he had a contractual obligation to deliver an album to Geffen Records, I think. So he recorded an album in 10 days. In order to
I remember you talking about,
and it was like a #1 album. It's a great album. It's called "I Never Said Goodbye," or it's just called Sammy Hagar, I think, in Europe.
He did everything.
No, he didn't. So he played guitar on it, and he had a couple of other guys he played with forever play drums, and Eddie Van Halen plays bass. Eddie Van Halen, in order to help them finish that up, he jumped in and played the bass parts on the album, and they recorded in 10 days. And so people are like, I can't believe you recorded an album in 10 days. He goes, well, I'd already written the songs, and because he listed the musicians, and is like, had the best guys in the world on the album. 10 days was no problem.
Yeah.
We had to get it done so I could actually join Van Halen and we could start promoting this new stuff that I was working on with Eddie. So,
yeah.
I bring that up because people are like, it takes takes forever to do something that's good. It's like, if you know what you're doing, you can do
Not
it.
really.
You know,
Yeah.
that last Black Sabbath album with Dio, The Devil You Know, they recorded that just in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Wrote and recorded it. It's like, well, they've been doing it for 50 years, like together.
Yeah.
It wasn't an issue. They just had it down. You know,
Yeah, you got to think about these guys are constantly picking out little riffs. I mean, like the engines are going all the time. So when it comes time to put something to tape, I mean, essentially, I mean, if it's what you do and it's what you care about, you've got a library of that stuff logged. So I mean, you put the best stuff together, and you can turn out an album pretty quick.
Yeah, it's true. So anyway, let's jump in. Let's talk a little bit about how the music business has changed. I know I see JD Cowan in the chat, and he and I have talked briefly about, you know, there was a music business collapse in the early 2000s. And I don't know if we want to start there. We want to start before that, because the music business wasn't necessarily a great business to be in prior to that either.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think it really comes down to, in addition to the music industry, it's really, you know, the issue with so many different facets of media is that saturation, man. There's so much stuff out there. I remember when I was young, I had like 2 or 3 artists that I really latched onto that I liked a lot. To find quality music or stuff that you're even interested in. I know you've talked about it. I'm sure, you know, from a publishing point of view, you got the same kind of issues on Amazon. To find something that you're interested in is work. You literally, as a consumer, have to put in so much work. You got to do so much footwork to find stuff that you're interested in.
Yeah, the filtering mechanisms are, everything's so wide open. You know, back in, you know, let's say pre-Napster, you know, in order to find a record that you liked, you just didn't have that many options.
Yeah.
You know, everything was kind of pre-filtered, and you had these other things. You had a couple different filters that would help you find music that you liked. So number one is you go down to the record store and you just look through what was there. And you know, I bought a number of albums just based on what the cover was.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The cover looked cool, so I bought it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it was deceptive. Like if you buy a Molly Hatchet record that has you know, one of those Frank Frazetta covers on it, and you listen to it, you're like, what? I thought this was metal or something. This looked like a Manowar cover.
Yeah, it was like Wolf Mother. You're like, oh, this is an incredible cover, and you get involved, and you're like, what is going on here? this is odd.
Yeah.
Do you remember when artists would put out? They would call them singles, but it was like 2 or 3 songs, but they would actually release them on a hard disc. You could get like 2 or 3 songs from the album on a hard CD disc.
Yeah, they had CD singles in the 90s. I have a couple of them still sitting around in different places. So what they do is, see, you know, and it's the record company is trying to figure out how to make singles a moneymaker again, because in the old days it was a 45. You had the 45 RPM single. So you'd have a song on one side, you know, 3 or 4 minute song. You flip it over and you get a free song on the backside too. And so the B-side, and the B-side was usually not on the album. And then they started doing these CD singles where a lot of the bands were like, well, what do we put on the B-side? Because our albums now have 12 songs on them. It's not, you don't cut 4 songs out to make the album. That's what you used to do, is you'd cut 12 and you'd put 8 on the album, and you'd have 4 just as B-sides for the singles. Now they cut, starting in the 90s, they started cutting 12 and releasing 12. And so your CD single would be like, you know, Metallica put like, here's a live version. And it's like, it's like, I don't want to hear the same song, but you're making mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. or like S&M. Did you get into S&M?
Yeah, I have S&M. I thought the DVD was a brilliant concept.
Yeah.
You could go through and you could turn off the different parts to it.
There was a few tracks like Inner Sandman, I think were pretty cool. There a few of them I was kind of just like, is this too much? Is this a little bit too much?
But in general, I thought most of the S&M songs were worse than the originals as far as what was there, because it just added stuff that didn't need to be there. The exception was those 2 songs they wrote for the album, No Leaf Clover and what was the other one called? Minus Human. I don't remember. Minus Human. So those 2 were really good, and they sounded great with an orchestra, but they had worked with Michael Kamen and composed those songs just for, you know, they kind of had the ideas kicking around, but they worked with him to get those ready just for that album. And so they're actually pretty unique on there. It's kind of like Metallica meets Rhapsody for a couple of songs. And likewise, I think Rhapsody is just the opposite of that, because they wrote all the orchestra parts with all of the other stuff. You know, they did it all at the same time, so it doesn't sound kind of pasted together the way S&M did.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Metallica, man, I think that's, you know, talking about the music industry, I think it's kind of where we enter a little bit of a gray area because of their big feud with Napster. As an artist, as an artist, you want the things that you do to be as accessible as it possibly can be to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
How do you do that without making the artist smaller and smaller and smaller in the equation in terms of money, in terms of getting some type of revenue going for the stuff that you're producing? So that I obviously I think that they were correct in. I don't know if they were correct in how they went about it. They're definitely correct in the idea of, hey, you're stealing music from artists. They deserve to be paid for what they're doing. And I think that kind of leads us to where we are now. Labels, like a lot of other corporations and industries, have tried to do what they can to survive. So I think that we've entered a quantity over quality phase of music publishing, and that's kind of what I think's been its downfall. I mean, you're pumping out. You take a specific genre, you take like screamo or like hardcore metal. They pump these artists out. These kids are 17, 18 years old. They pump these artists out. It's like a factory. They go in, they get this contract. They're jazzed to hear their music that they've written in their garage, digitally recorded. They have no idea what they're listening to. They don't know any idea about EQing, leveling. They're just pumped to hear their music sound better than what it does on the tape they recorded it on. And they settle for that. And then they pump them out there and they make them tour, and then they're done with them in 4 years. And that's the story for so many of these guys. And it's sad for the artists.
It's actually been the story way before Napster. Way before. And so there is an article, and I'm going to look it up real quick. It was written by Steve Albini, and it's called The Problem with Music. And the problem with music, here's a copy of it. He explains what record companies did to artists. So I'm going to link it in the chat there. This is I don't remember where it was originally published, but this is it. And so he goes through and he gives all the numbers. This is from like the 90s, basically. But you go through and you get all the numbers for like how little money they make. So he goes down here. Here's the math, and I'll explain just how effed they are. Advance, $250,000 advance. They give a band a $250,000 advance. You're like, wow, that's a lot of money, right?
That sounds great to a 20-year-old kid.
Managers cuts $37,500, $10,000 in legal fees. So right off the bat, your $50,000 is gone.
Yeah.
Recording budget $150,000. Producers advance $50,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Studio fees $52,000. Drum, amp, mic, and phase doctors. These are people who come in to get the phases out of the drum mics, because that actually happens a lot. I actually don't think it matters, but I could talk about that in a minute, because this is Steve Albini's. He puts the stuff in quotes because he's like, they come in, they pay people, and like everybody thinks the mic sounds so warm, but it just doesn't matter. And he was a producer for years and years, and an independent performer. Recording tapes, $8,000. You just have to pay for the tapes. You know, $5,000 for equipment rental, $5,000 for transport, $10,000 for lodgings while in the studio, $3,000 in catering, $10,000 mastering fee. Tape, copies, reference CDs, shipping tapes, miscellaneous expenses, $2,000. Video budget, you got to record a music video, $30,000. Cameras, $8,000. Crew, $5,000. Processing and transfers. He goes all the way down. Album artwork, $5,000. Promotional photo shoot, $2,000. You go all the way down to the bottom, and the balance sheet is, the band members' net income each $4,031.25 for the entire album cycle, including touring.
Yeah.
The band is now 1/4 of the way through the contract, has made the music industry more than $3 million richer, but is in the hole $14,000 on royalties. The band members said each earned about 1/3 as much as they would have working at a 7-Eleven, but they got to ride in a tour bus for a month. The next album will be about the same, except the record company will insist they spend more time and money on it. Since the previous one never recouped, the band will have no leverage and will oblige. The next tour will be about the same, except the merchandising advance will have already been paid, and the band, strangely enough, won't have earned any royalties from their T-shirts yet. Maybe the T-shirt guys have figured out how to count money like the record company guys.
Man,
so he goes through it, and it's really, it's really brutal. So even back in the 90s, the people who were pros at this, and I think this is why bands like NoFX and some of these other actual punk bands went so independent, is they were kind of aware of this.
Bad Religion.
Black Flag didn't make a ton of money, but they didn't come out of the hole. You know, they came out of it okay. It's like their whole point was not to even care about making money, and they probably made enough money to survive. They kept they toured in a van.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another reason you see, these labels kind of flailing like fishes out of water, is artists over time have become pretty savvy on what it takes to produce their own stuff. Like you were talking about, all these, how much time do you think these artists get to spend in the mixing booth with with the engineers, trying to adjust the mic levels on that? I mean, they don't get any of that. They just pump these guys out of there. And I think once the technology being to where it is now, where you can essentially write and record your own stuff and promote your own stuff, the internet has opened up an incredible world for artists, especially music artists, that once people started getting kind of savvy with that sort of thing, the smaller and smaller the necessity for a record label has become.
Yeah. So, I mean, now the record label was always kind of a filter. So there's all kinds of tons of music. And I've made this point, and people don't seem to really believe me on it, because people love to believe in this idea that like the stuff that is popular is the best quality. But I don't see, any kind of relationship between quality and success. And part of that is that filter. So there was dozens of bands that used to play on Sunset Strip back in the early 80s. Dozens. Yeah. Some of which have become famous after the fact. Some of which, like Quiet Riot. Some of which just never really went anywhere. The one band that really made it out was like Motley Crue, right?
Yeah.
So, Motley Crue must have been the best band. It's like, no way. There were so many better bands. But Motley Crue had the right look. They showed up to all their gigs. No matter how many drugs they did, they never missed gigs. So they always showed up and roll the dice. And eventually they got the record contract. Other people dressed just like them. Other people's music sounded just like them. In fact, probably better. Vince Neil's not the best singer. Mick Mars is not the best guitar player.
Yeah.
Tommy Lee's good, but it's, they're not the best musicians. And in fact, that's the first thing the critics said, is like, these are really aren't the best musicians, but if you need something that's like harder edge Kiss, then this is good. And that's what it was. It was,
yeah.
And it was kind of I'm not going to say randomness, but luck has a lot to do with it.
Dude, out of that entire scene, I feel like if you watch interviews and stuff with him, I feel like CC DeVille was like the guy that was really about his instrument. Like that dude wanted to be a guitar player, and he was an incredible guitar player. Like I don't really feel like that guy gets the props that he deserves, because Poison's not as popular as what Motley Crue was.
Yeah, same thing with Winger.
Yeah,
or Winger. Yeah, you remember Winger?
Yeah.
So like, there's actually a Metallica video with like Lars like throwing darts at Kip Winger's face, and there was like there's this feud between Metallica and Winger. I'm like, I don't understand why. Winger were top level musicians, and actually, even these kind of pop oriented bands. Like one of my favorites is actually a band from the 80s called Lone Ranger. And Lone Ranger, it's like you hear this kind of like 80s pop kind of rock sound, and then they get to the guitar solos and you're like, these guys can play.
Oh man.
And the lead singer's the drummer,
Yeah.
It's like these guys were really talented, but they just kind of like played down their level a little bit to kind of get in the mainstream there.
Yeah. Do you remember Jackal?
Jackal, yeah.
Yeah, dude, my uncle, he's a different guy. He marches to the beat of his own drummer. I was like maybe 11, maybe 12 years old. He had a tape of Jackal. And I remember being in his Jeep and he was like, Mike, check this out. And he put Jackal in. And it was like, I was just like, this is wild, but I like it. I really like it a lot.
There's lots of stuff. So the big thing that happens with, filters is that the record company decides what is successful. That's the first filter. And everybody else doesn't really get attention from the outside. I knew a guy a couple years ago who had a band called Bible Black in the 80s. And he's like, he was talking about playing a show with Megadeth. And I was like, dude, you opened for Megadeth? He goes, they opened for us. They were nobodies. Right. And it's like, what? It's like, yeah, that's,
all right.
That's how it was. But everybody forgot about his band because Megadeth took off. And
you're your own biggest fan, man.
Yeah.
But
it's true. Like they would, it was their gig and they were a bigger band in that particular moment, but it just didn't, it didn't translate to the long-term success, to that explosive success.
That's really interesting, man.
So it's an interesting thing about. My point is that it was tough for the artist beforehand. As a listener, you always, you had the record labels doing a lot of filtering, and over time, I think you started to have. So let's maybe jump to Napster, because I think some interesting things happen after Napster. What's your opinion on Napster?
Man, well, when Napster was getting kind of big, I was in junior high and early high school. So there was also Napster. There was also BearShare and LimeWire. So
LimeWire came a little bit later.
Yeah, well, BearShare was the big thing in our area. I didn't really use Napster a whole lot. I'd messed with it before, but I'd used BearShare for a lot of things. But I knew a lot of people that used Napster. Napster, I didn't really become really familiar with it until Metallica started attacking them. I never really used Napster for a whole lot of things until they created that big stink.
Yeah. So Napster was when I first realized that everyone would rather get something for free than pay money for it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. Now, I was already a musician in high school, and I was thinking about a career in music, and the quickness with which everybody that I knew was willing to just steal all their music. People stopped buying CDs overnight. There was this point where people were like, well, just get it off Napster. Why would you buy CDs, dude? They were buying little MP3 players. And I was going to do a video on some, here's like an iPad or an iPod. I actually have, let me show this to you. I'll doing a video on like mobile gaming history and stuff. But like, here's an original iPod, right?
Yeah.
Actually, no, this is
remember that.
Second gen. This one's second gen. This is a 20 gigabyte iPod. Back when 20 gigs was like, oh my gosh,
that's a ton of songs.
That's a ton of songs. But people would buy these big hard disk ones, and they're like, it holds 3 gigabytes of songs and 3 gigabytes of MP3s. Dude, you had the entire catalog of every band you liked off of Napster and put it on there, is what it was like. It was huge. I had a friend who had a 6 gig device at one point, and that 6 gig device, he's like, oh yeah, I spent the whole weekend downloading stuff off Napster, and he had the entire catalog of like Metallica, Megadeth, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden on there. And I'm like, you don't even like these bands? He goes, yeah, but whatever, So yeah, it changed everything overnight, and just no one bought records anymore, like except for me. And the reason I was buying records is the stuff I wanted to listen to, you actually couldn't find on Napster.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like,
yeah,
but, I had to buy stuff from like Norway. It's like, oh man, I want this Burzum record. And it's like that they talked about in this magazine, which is another filter, like Metal Maniacs. I don't know if you remember magazines like those.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd read Metal Maniacs, and they have a write up on like Varg in prison. I'm like, I'm going to get this guy's record, and you'd have to order it, and then they'd send it to you a couple weeks later, hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully it'd make it to your house, and you pop it out and put it in, and you'd be like, this sounds awful, but it's really underground, so it must be cool, right?
Yeah, dude. I still have that. I still have that issue with Spotify sometimes. Like, I listen to these electronic artists, AES Dana and Solar Fields. Solar Fields actually did the soundtrack to that game Mirror's Edge a few years back, and I think he did the second one too. But his solo stuff, his independent stuff is fantastic, man. I couldn't find those guys for the longest time, so it's still an issue. I guess it just depends on like how indie the stuff is that you're checking out.
Yeah. But anyway, that's when I realized everything changed overnight. And I think JD had it right. Like, there was a collapse about the year 2000, 2001. And so by the time I was in college, I remember having debates with other people in classes where they're like, there's nothing wrong with that. Who cares about downloading songs? I might buy their album after downloading their songs. I'm like, no, you wouldn't. No, you don't. And like the numbers show that. Like the numbers went down into the
Don't lie.
And then I said, well, they're like, oh, well, these artists make like millions of dollars on their tour, which is an interesting moral argument. It's saying like, I can steal from this person because they already have money other ways, right?
Yeah.
Which is not correct. But I said, well, there's more people that are involved with that than just the artists, right? I'm like, there's all these other people that get paid when you make a record. There's a producer, there's a recording engineer, there's people who make the artwork, there's people who do the mask, there's people who do all these things in the industry.
Yeah, merch.
None of them get paid if you steal the record.
Yeah.
And I actually think that I don't know if this was a result of this, but in the mid-aughts, there was a huge decline in the quality of music production.
Dude.
Did you notice this?
Oh man. I talk about it all the time, man. I talk about I'm a drummer, so I usually speak from a drummer's point of view. And I rail on this idea of resonance on the snare. And I forget who I was talking to on Twitter the other day, but if I don't hear any type of resonance on the snare or the toms, for me, what is left for me to believe that an actual human is playing this stuff?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because technology, there's so much stuff out there that can mimic how guitar sounds and drum sounds. It's like, I want to know that someone is sitting down and playing this stuff, because otherwise, if I don't go see them in concert, I should have a little bit of an avenue to connect to the human beings through this recording. If I don't hear any of the people in the recording, what am I getting from this? You're not getting anything from it. But what they've done is they fine-tuned this process to where it's like, okay, well, of course you want it to sound like this. You want it to sound like a machine. You don't want to sound human. And they just pump this stuff out, dude, like a factory. And it's so forgettable.
It's kind of like triggered bass drums. You know, I don't hate triggered bass drums, but all of them are trying to sound like what Pete Sandoval's actual bass drums sounded like in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
he had a really specific setup. He put duct tape on the heads and tightened them real tight, and he used like a little bit smaller bass drum, and he did all this stuff to get it, because he played so fast. He just wanted that attack, that sharp attack on all his bass drum sounds. And so people were like, it's easier to just put a little MIDI trigger on there, or just play electronic bass drums than it is
taking the person out of it.
Yeah, to do that. Yeah. So, and then you could go to a different level. I know there were drummers that did this, where you could set up your triggers where instead of, when you hit it, you could actually have it fire like, you could put the beaters like right off the heads. So just like, and just like, boom, it sounded like really huge. Or you could get it to just fire off like a whole bunch of notes at once. Yeah. So you're really just going, it'd be, and they're just,
you're getting 16ths out of nowhere. What is this guy doing? Vinny would tape quarters to his malice. That was true. He would tape quarters. Vinnie Paul would tape quarters to his malice to get that like smacking a raw steak type of sound. And I think guys like I don't know if you listen to Origin or not, John Longstreth. This guy's not human. The aliens will be back to pick this guy up one day. Okay, he does not belong among us. I don't know what this guy's doing, but bands like that and bands like Nile, these drummers. And I respect it, because I know that it takes an insane amount of skill to play at this tempo. Guys like that use triggers, I get it, because there's so much going on, especially live. If they're doing that kind of thing live, you want to have a consistent tempo. And they're still playing it, even if you're just tapping the bass drum a little bit, but you still get the full smack. I get it, because these guys are doing so much else. Lars using triggers. Come on, dude. Like you don't need that. You don't need that. Let's just let's mic the bass drum. Let me hear the quality of that kit. Let me hear exactly what you're doing. But he uses triggers.
Yeah. I didn't know Lars had started. I thought he maybe started using triggers at some point here. Well, compare that. I mean, think about how good his drums sound on the Black album. Like, that's some of the best drum miking that you're going to hear.
Oh man.
And when if I do program drums on something, I use, Ableton has a whole setup that has a giant multi-mic setup to get a sound like that.
Yeah.
I take a lot of time to try to make the drums at least sound real. I play a lot of stuff in on an electronic kit, because I don't really have the capacity to have a full drum set at the home or anything like that.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. I do remember, Hellhammer from Mayhem, on the last couple of records that they've done really like stripped down mics on the drums, like very raw, but they still use the triggers. Like it's like the bass drums are triggered and everything else is like the raw sound. And it still sounds pretty raw. The bass drum triggers kind of have to be triggered. I think you have to have that sound, because he plays so fast, but also you got to cut through that mix. There's that screeching high end that you get in black metal, and you're going to lose the sound of the bass drum. And that's something I noticed with some metal records, especially from the 80s, is like, can't hear the bass drum sometimes because of the way they produced it. It's just like there's no bass drum sound in it. Some of the Halloween, like that first Halloween record. Now, well, the remastered one, you can hear the bass drum really good. But like I'm thinking like Keeper of the Seven Keys, it's just like that the bass drum's so hard to hear under the mix.
Swallowed up. Yeah.
It's like kind of too woofy. You need that kind of quarters taped to your beaters kind of sound.
You want it to cut through a little bit, man. I totally get that. I mean, I've seen I've seen so many shows live. I tell you, man, it's kind of crazy. One of the most, I know the theatrics are through the roof, but one of the best sounding live bands I've ever heard was Guar.
Yeah, Guar.
Like, they sound really good live, dude. Like it shocked me. It's like, I mean, the theatrics are obviously insane. They're bringing people out and ripping things apart. It's crazy. You know what you're gonna get if you see Guar live. But I saw them in 2007. Actually, it was the Sounds of the Underground tour, and it was at Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky. When you walk up onto Waverly Hills, there's a gate, and on the gate there's like framed this little write up in a paper about Waverly Hills. And apparently one of the people, like one of the workers, hung themselves. And this whole cutout is on the gate before you get up into Waverly Hills. So you see Waverly Hills Sanitarium on this cutout, on this little this little article. They open the gate and you walk up and there's Waverly Hills. Like you just saw it there. That's where that person was. That's where they had this show. It was just like 2007, so I was a lot younger. And Lamb of God was there. Behemoth was there, which was actually my favorite performance. But as far as quality, I was blown away at how Guar sounded live. I could care less about the theatrics. Their sound was incredible.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by it.
I'm trying to think like best sounding live bands. It's hard to. I'd probably say Gamma Ray is actually the best sounding live band I've ever heard. They came in, they flew into LA and played at the Key Club, which is closed down now, but they played there on borrowed instruments. So the drum set had price tags on it. They borrowed it from a music store because they
like rented it out.
Yeah, they couldn't get their instruments in or something. They were playing on borrowed amps that they'd never used before. So Kai was playing on some Mesa Boogie that was sitting around somewhere, and Hinya was playing on an Ibanez amp, and it was like the best sounding thing I ever heard. Nice. I don't know. They brought in a good sound guy or something. He really dialed it in, but I was like, you could hear everything was crystal clear. Everything was loud and perfect listening volume. And of course they were unbelievably tight playing, and they made it. It was like nothing to them. Kai Hansen came out chewing gum and was like, this is easy. And it was such a great show, and they played for forever. It felt like. I'd probably say number 2. Blind Guardian was really good live. I mean,
that was a good show.
And that was same thing. It's like the first bands that played before them, their sound was awful. You couldn't hear the guitars. All you could hear was like bass drum. Blind Guardian comes out, everything's just like crystal clear.
Solid as a rock. Yeah, I saw. Are you familiar with the Faceless?
Yes.
Band? They I saw them in Charlotte a few years back at St. Amos, and dude, that to be as intricate and detailed as the stuff that they're doing, they're insanely tight. I'm not even sure if they're still together, man, but it was incredible to see. It was just impressive, man.
Morbid Angel was also really good. I saw Morbid Angel back in like 2001, so this was Steve Tucker era. It was really good. Like I didn't realize that a band could play death metal like that cleanly. They were really clean. I was shocked. Yeah. I was shocked how well they played. And of course, Pete Sandoval. I mean, it's enough said with him. And of course, it started with him playing a drum solo before, there's no sound on. He just came out and started playing. And I had to start miking while he's playing. And I guess he used to do that just to piss off sound guys and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was good. Anyway, the point I wanted to get here. So after this kind of collapse in 2000, people had to start making records on tighter budgets because they just weren't getting money anymore. And I noticed 2 things that happened, and maybe you noticed this, is that record labels took on a little bit of a different role. It used to be you had a big record label that would bankroll give you $250,000 to record a recording, put you on tour, have a 360 deal. Then you started getting what I would call boutique labels, like Nuclear Blast started to take off in the early 2000s, because if you listened to a band on Nuclear Blast, you knew it was a metal band, and you also got a certain level of production quality. There was a Nuclear Blast sound in the mid 2000s, and it was that Frederick Nordstrom, highly maximized, super punchy sound. Every band that was coming out on Nuclear Blast had the same sound, as far as their guitars all sounded the same. The drums were all, everything was EQ'd the same.
Yeah.
And it was a good quality for it. But at the same time, I felt like there was this decline in recording quality in the mid-aughts. And I'm not really sure why that is. I think as people made the jump to digital, like the tech hadn't caught up to the way how good analog used to be.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. What do you think it is?
I think that's it, man. I mean, I think that the plus is that it was consistent, and the downfall was that it was consistent. You know what I mean? It was just a whole lot for very little. Yeah, man. I think that they found a formula. They found a formula that works. And I keep going back to they found a formula that works to just get a whole lot out for as little money and as quick as possible. Because I think they saw the industry in decline. And they witnessed the atmosphere becoming such that, okay, well, there's really nothing we can do that prevents the artist from being smaller and smaller and smaller. We got to have music, but we really just need to get these guys on the road and get them in front of people and start, hitting up Ticketmaster and getting people and selling shirts. And I mean, like, how much do these artists make from record sales? You know what I mean?
Now,
yeah, it's almost nothing.
I'd say the record is kind of like this necessary ingredient to whatever you're doing. So you got to have the record so that people can find you on YouTube is what it's like. And then go see your show. That's where you're going to make the money is hopefully you go see the show. And that's where we've been, I think, for a while now. I remember South Park actually making this exact justification. So like, well, if people really like him, then they'll still go see him live. I'm like, well, that's where we're at. You make an album basically for free because it's a promotional part of what you need to do. And actually, I think there's another point to be made here too, which is, you had to make them quicker and stuff. But I think back in the 80s, if you were going to schedule recording time and you were a band, you had all your shit really squared away before you came into the studio because it was expensive. Yeah, especially when you're starting out, you just couldn't afford studio time. I know the very first Misfits records were recorded overnight because they could get the studio for like virtually no money, just access to it overnight. So they'd go in at like 11 o'clock at night and leave at like 5 a.m. to record their music. And that was the only way they could afford to do it. So you used to get your shit really squared away ahead of time. And like what JD Cowan says, rock music without roughness just isn't quite right. There's nothing perfect on those old recordings. Even something like Heaven and Hell, which turns 40 today and is as close to a perfect rock record as you're going to get as far as performance goes. There's things that if you were to talk to Tony or Dio was alive to talk to, be like, we didn't love the way this worked, but it was good enough and we shipped it. Yeah. The perfect was the enemy of the good. And so you just did the best you could with the time that you had and what you had access to. Now with digital, you can do 100 different takes. You can cut it in, cut it out. Oh yeah. It's like Dio's like, I came in just slightly early on that note. And it's like, we can't re-record it. The take was good. So otherwise it was good. We're leaving it on the tape. Yeah. That's the way it was. Yeah.
That's the true testament of an artist, man. It's like you were saying, like how quick can you have all of your shit together before you get in there, because it's crunch time. You're dealing with a limited window of time. Can you get what you want out there done in that limited window of time with that kind of pressure? That's tough, man. I mean, and a lot of the records reflect that. We've got some gold from that, and we've also got some.
I'm a fan. Yeah, I'm a fan of putting limits on whatever you're doing because it forces you to think in the terms of what's available and maximizing what you can do. So, I mean, there's records that never came out. Like there was that Beach Boys record that never came out. I'm trying to remember what it was called. The only song to come out of it was like Good Vibration. But like they had too much access to money and time, and the recording session ground on, and Brian Wilson ended up going insane, during the recording process, and everything fell apart. Yeah. If you had drawn a limit around it, that's like, no, we're only going to record what the live band can record, then you probably would have come out with a record. And I think that's actually kind of a weird flip side to digital too, is that digital takes a lot of those limits off. You could do it over and over again. So the standard for some people becomes perfection rather than good. Yeah. So I see some artists that just never, like they don't come out with records like ever because I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're slaving away for years at the record. I'm still waiting on Time 2 from Winter Sun, Been waiting from that for 8 years, waited on Time 1 for 8 years. Like, when is this shit coming out, guys? It's like, it's not high enough quality yet. It's like, no one cares. We want to hear some guitar solos and shit. Put it out.
No, 100%, dude.
All right.
In a perfect world, we have instrumentals of Tool and Rage Against the Machine's discographies. In a perfect world, we have instrumentals of all those, but we don't have instrumentals of all those. There's some really good stuff. Danny Carey is a dynamite drummer, and he's just in a band that I can't listen to, and I hate that. I really hate that a lot.
Yeah. Tool, I don't hate Tool's one of these bands. It's like I don't hate him, but I don't understand the love for him. And I had some friends who like Tool, and whenever I listen to Tool, I'd be like, the only really interesting thing I think is the drumming. That's what I always came away with, was just the drumming was really interesting. And otherwise, I just didn't listen to a lot of the other stuff.
That's about all.
Oh, what was another record? Chinese Democracy by Guns N' Roses. This even started in the pre-digital era, where it was like, Axl Rose had all the time and money in the world, and so nothing ever happened. And when it finally came out, you're like, this is not that good. Yeah. But if you just come out with that record like immediately after Use Your Illusion or something, people be like, this is good. I wanted more Guns N' Roses this year, and here it is. Right? Yeah. So I think the perfect can be the enemy of the good in the digital space too. And I think people also have this really, I don't know, kind of ridiculous expectations for what it should be. I think also people are used to listening to totally electronic music, and then they don't know how to react to things that aren't that.
Yo, dude, yes. Yeah, well, and I think a good I got a good friend. His name's Luke. He's like 15, 16 years old, and he's really into vinyl. And when he was a little bit younger, he was really into like tech metal and like really highly produced stuff. And then he got introduced to older music, vinyl. And he started listening to Zeppelin and Sabbath, and he was just like, dude, it's got this like airy, atmospheric, I feel like the guys are in the room playing with me. And I'm like, Luke, that's the good shit. That's the good shit. Like that's what you need. They essentially were. Yeah. Like they were together. There's no click track. You're hearing these guys play this stuff live, recorded.
Yeah. So, and even if you did like track by track stuff, the first two Morbid Angel records, there's no click track.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just Pete. And you can hear him speed up and slow down at times, but it just kind of gives a different dynamic. It
works.
Same thing with a lot of the early black metal stuff. As fast as it was, they didn't have click tracks. They didn't know what the hell that was. They're like, they turned on the boombox and started playing as fast as they could, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
That's the way you operated. Or there's actually a story with Stairway to Heaven. Is Led Zeppelin? They're like, we wanted to do this song that accelerated, that had an accelerando that got faster as you went on. And this, the record company was like, no, you have to have one constant tempo. It's like, even back in the 70s and 60s, they were like, you got to have one tempo. They didn't even let, on one of the Beatles records, on one of them, they didn't let Ringo Starr play on the record.
Well,
because the time was bad.
His timing was bad?
They put a studio drummer in because that studio drummer could play like a metronome. And, and the Beatles were like, it was really dumb that they did this. And Ringo was a really good sport about it, because we didn't care about sticking to like really hard time. We wanted energy, and that we were a live band, and that's the way we played. Yeah. And so, Ringo didn't stick to one tempo all the time, but that didn't matter to us.
Yeah.
We're a Liverpool band. It just didn't matter.
Who was it before Ringo? Was it Pete Best?
Pete Best, yeah.
Their original drummer.
Yeah. I think Ringo is kind of like the luckiest guy in rock.
Oh yeah, he's the George Lucas of rock and roll. Yeah, I mean George Lucas is incredible because he surrounded himself with the most talented people in the business. Yeah. For so many years.
It's kind of like Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne's like, oh man, Ozzy's put out all these good records. It's like Ozzy really is not a good musician. He would have Lemmy from Motorhead write his songs for him and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, and he's upfront about it, but he just would always hire the most talented guys around. Like whoever's playing guitar for Ozzy's pretty much filtered to be one of the best players around for rock.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's,
we wouldn't have a clue who Randy Rhoads is.
Else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, Quiet Riot, we only know who Quiet Riot is because we know who Randy Rhoads is. Quiet Riot was one of those Sunset Strip bands that just no one knew about. They got filtered out, Yeah. No one would have known about them if it wasn't Ozzy. We would have just known about Motley Crue.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, man. You released an album, was it last year or was it 2018?
I think it was a couple of years ago. I think it was Might have been 2017. 2017 is when I actually finished it. This one?
Yeah, Zool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your process with that. I don't know if you've touched on. I know you touched on your music background a little bit in your newest book, but as far as Zool goes, I want to know a little bit about your process. Like, did you write it record it as you wrote it, or did you have like a groundwork for each track, or how did that work?
Yeah. So I had a completely unique approach to doing this kind of music. It's just instrumental rock or ambient rock. And I was working as a music teacher at the time when I started recording this. And I just had a couple ideas and wanted to experiment a little bit. So rather than writing stuff out, because my music degree is in composition, and so I'm used to just writing scores and then that's the music, because that's kind of how we're taught to do it. I'm like, I'm going to do it a different way, and I'm going to record the music directly. I'm going to write the music by recording it rather than so I called it direct composition. So rather than writing it on a paper for performance, which is what works in the 18th century when you don't have recording media, and actually you do have recording media, because the staff paper is your recording media. You're actually recording the music when you write it down, just like how you're recording a book when you write out the words. You're not hearing it. It's not an audio recording. You have to reproduce it with the help of musicians who read that music. But it is a recording of the music nonetheless. This is how we know what Renaissance music sounded like, is because we have the pneumatic notation written on the page. And so we pull it up and sing it again, and that's amazing. It's amazing that we have that. Just like how we know what words they used in the 15th century. So but we have audio recording. So I'm like, I'm going to just record the audio directly. And so I went with that, and I did the whole thing on Ableton, which is usually used by electronic musicians, but it just gave me a lot of options for quickly organizing the idea. So I could record a section, could throw it out, I could move it around, duplicate it, put in repeats wherever I wanted to. And then so I'd usually start with like, a guitar part or a keyboard part or a bass part. Then I'd add drums in, and then I'd layer everything else in. So I'd usually start with guitar, and then I'd come up with a couple of sections, and then I'd start layering before I ever finish. So I start writing everything at once. Once I get the sound of like the texture of what I'm doing in the piece, then it's a lot easier for me to go all the way through and find ideas that are going to work in that context. So if you listen to the first song on the record, Lux, which was, I think, the second song that I wrote. The first one I wrote was called Wooden Room, which is just a bunch of classical guitar on top of it. The Wooden Room was about like fractal stuff, but it doesn't sound like that. It just sounds like a bunch of guitars playing. And so I played had a little 4-chord idea. I started with that, started layering, added some drum parts, and then wrote that to the end. And my son actually plays keyboards on it. He just wanted he was like 18 months old or like 2 years old. And he just started playing in some keyboard parts, and I just kept him, and I had him do a couple takes, and whatever I liked, I kept as a little aleatoric element. And you can hear these like soaring keyboards. That's just my son playing keyboards on top of it.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And he plays drum fills on some of the other songs too, because he can't really play drums, but he likes to play the drum. He could play the drum fills. So he does plays the drum fills and stuff on an electronic kit or on a keyboard, depending on what he's doing. He always liked that. So and then I just kind of went through, I recorded a song, once a week or every other week for a while. And after a couple months of work on it, I was really close to done. And then I decided I'd do like 2 more songs, and I came up with these little interludes, recorded them, and then the record was done. So I just kind of worked on it in the margins, like in between writing projects and stuff like that. I would do it on the weekends, and during the weekdays I'd be working on a book, be writing a book. On the weekends I'd usually have a big block of time, like 4 or 5 hours, and that I have to it takes me a long time to write music. I got to be in it for a long time. I can't do it for 20 minutes at a time, but I can draft a book pretty quickly. I can sit down and open up my document and go, that's where I'm at, and go. But I can't do that. Just can't. I have to have a little more space for it to exist in my head for me to really figure out.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that. Well, in terms of rhythm, Confusion at the Puzzle Gate.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Tell me a little bit about that one, because
it's all about hemiolas. There's just a bunch of hemiolas, and so that's kind of what I wanted. Is I wanted it to be, because it's basically in 4/4 time, and the drum part just kind of has kind of a little syncopated bass drum sound to it to kind of disturb the fact that it's just,
Yeah.
and then I just
It
put
works.
I just put a bunch of hemiolas on top of it to just because I think hemiolas sound cool. So if you hear like a 3 over a 4, for instance, or I put like an 8/8 part on it, just to kind of bring out those different accents, and then I go back with the drum parts and I kind of rewrite the drum parts again to bring out where those hemiola accents were happening.
Yeah.
And that was kind of cool about working in the digital space because all the drum parts were basically recorded as MIDI. So I could just move the notes around or just delete a part, record in a new part, throw out this measure, put in a different measure, I also did this thing with that one where I recorded the hi-hats completely separately so that they could be just completely weird. So the hi-hat parts are like, it's just, if you're only playing hi-hat, you can do really crazy hi-hat stuff. It's actually would be impossible to play on a kit. Because you just wouldn't be able to do the hi-hats and all of the pedal work at the same time. It would just be too weird.
Too much, yeah.
So the hi-hats are recorded separately from the rest of the drum parts.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was an idea. I think it worked. But I had somebody mention like, man, those hi-hats are crazy. I'm like, yeah, I just recorded them separately so they'd be really weird.
It's really cool. Yeah, it's cool, man. Did you find any kind of like, I mean, I know you're a guitar centric kind of guy, but I mean, obviously you've got a very, in-depth understanding of rhythm to write an entire album, with rhythm in mind. Did you find any what was some speed bumps that you hit writing the drums, if you had any kind of speed bumps?
So the big speed bumps writing the drums really is like my limited technique. I'm not a good drummer, so I just relied on a lot of MIDI stuff to kind of fill in that gap.
Sure, yeah.
And then I'd probably say as far as writing drum parts, it's really easy to fall into either two areas when you're dealing with rhythm or drums. Area one is it's too phoned in. It's just that backbeat through everything. And that backbeat's important. I decided that snare on 2 and 4 is really important for that feeling of rock. So I kept the most snares on 2 and 4. The other side of it is that some drummers get so crazy thinking about, I'm going to do diddles here and there across different instruments to produce such different complex rhythms. They get just kind of lost in the texture. Tried not to go to an extreme either, but I definitely went there with some of the hi-hat parts.
Yeah.
I definitely went with some of the hi-hat parts. Like I put the hi-hat parts in like 3/8 or something, just to be something bizarre. So it'd be something.
Yeah.
Just to disturb the rhythm. But I try not to go to too big of an extreme there, especially with as long as you have that 2 and 4 going, whatever else you do is going to be good. And I think I learned that mostly from jazz drummers, because in jazz drumming, you have the hi-hat on 2 and 4, not the snare. But you could have the snare if you're playing funk or something, right?
Yeah.
And so as long as the hi-hat's going on 2 and 4, I had a couple guys say, it's like, as long as the hi-hat's on 2 and 4, man, and you could do anything else.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter. The bass player is given quarter notes the whole time. So you just listen to the bass player for your time and then do 2 and 4 on your left foot, and then you can just do whatever you want. Yeah. And it just doesn't even matter, Yeah. Whoa. And then you start listening to jazz drummers, like that's why it sounds so creative, is they're only really worrying about maintaining one thing, which is their left foot. Their left foot's on 2 and 4, and everything else is whatever they feel like doing in the moment.
A lot of rock drummers have this term they like to use called in the pocket. Like, man, that guy's really in the pocket. And from what I gather, that means that they're really in the groove and they're really in the rhythm, and they're in their lane. And is that good? Like I don't think that's necessarily a good thing to be in the pocket. How much are you experimenting if you're in the pocket?
Yeah, it depends. Like I don't know. The idea of what groove is, I've had 20 different people explain it. Had an old jazz drummer named Stan Glide. He's like, people think playing in the groove is like playing out of time, because it's ridiculous. I've never heard something so stupid in my life. Yeah, like no, being in the groove. Playing exactly in time, so exactly in time that everything feels correct.
Yeah,
groovy.
Yeah.
So that was his thing. I had like jazz guys be like, oh, if you're playing in the groove, then the bass player's playing a little bit ahead. I'm like, dude, you can't keep time like that. I can't keep time like that.
No. Yeah, I mean, like the drummer and the bassist need to be like having lunch and stuff together. Like those guys need to get to know each other pretty
Yeah.
well.
And when I was playing jazz rhythm section, we were always like our own thing. It's like rhythm
Yeah.
section, and it's like there's like horn guys over it. We're not going to talk to the horn guys.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it about guitar that you gravitated to, man? I mean, like what was it about that instrument in particular?
So I don't know. I think I just really like metal and I like lead guitar, and so that
Fair enough.
early on. Oddly, I've probably had as many gigs as a bass player as a guitar player because everyone needs a bass player. They just are always in short supply. There's not a lot of great bass players out there, and I'm decent enough at it that I can do it. Do it pretty high level, but yeah, I think that's just what drew me to it. I got kind of sidetracked with classical guitar for like 10 years. In case people don't know my musical background, I was a music major. I was a classical guitarist, taught at the college level, taught classical guitar for about 10 years. Decided I would get out of that business because I think around 2011, 2012, I basically had my film. Like, I'm getting out of the music business. I'm done with the music business. This music business sucks. On the original topic of the stream. And there was a lot of things that built up to that. And so if you'll allow me to do a little bit of digression because it's on topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was I always made my money playing live. And because with classical guitar, if you're recording a CD, it's just something that you can maybe sell at a gig. That's why you have it. Or maybe, people didn't even discover you through YouTube back in the day. They discovered you through concerts and stuff, and you got more gigs by having more gigs. The more gigs you had, the more gigs you got. So eventually you built up to a place where like I was playing 4 or 5 nights a week and making a lot of money doing it. So my thing was always playing live. Well, in about 2008, there was a big economic turnaround, what people call the Great Recession. And the Great Recession was very asymmetrical in that it hit certain institutions way harder than it hit others. And one of the places that it hit hard was in all of these venues that I played. I played, restaurants, clubs, and stuff. And it's like within 3 months, everything closed where I was. I was in California. And I moved to Vegas basically to find opportunities to play because they didn't go away in Vegas. Live music stayed. At the same time, there was this dramatic shift away from having live musicians. I don't know, tastes were changing or something. Everything became no one had live music. Like after that, it was maybe 30% of what it was in Fresno, which is where I lived for a long time, and then in Vegas, it still kind of happened a little bit. There were places that had live bands, but they really just moved towards playing pre-recorded stuff. And just having no live music at the club at all. And people started to get annoyed with how loud it was, or they're not into rock music anymore, and electronic music. You don't really have a lot of live performances of that. You don't have people come in to do their stuff that they made on a sequencer. It's just kind of out on the internet. So the internet had an interesting effect in that it hurt live music as well. And so that argument that like, people go to their concerts. I did a video a while back, like all kinds of metal bands were just quitting the industry because they couldn't make any money in it. They're playing live like 200 dates a year. They're still not making money. So no, there's not necessarily money in live music either. It went away and just never really came back.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to get out of it. The other reason is that I just got real tired of playing the same music nonstop for 10 years. From it. And it wasn't music that I cared that much about. It wasn't music I wrote. It was all like standard repertoire stuff. You also couldn't, once the internet started to become a thing, I couldn't even put it out because of copyright issues. Mm-hmm. So like on YouTube, it's like, why don't you have all your recordings up on YouTube? It's like, because I get copyright strikes because I didn't write music. Yeah. Someone wrote it in like 1917, but there's someone that represents that person's estate is still kicking and ready to sue you.
Yeah, man. It's crazy. I mean, like I was saying, we're from a very, very small town in southern West Virginia. There's 17,000, actually, I think a little bit under 17,000 people in the entire county where I'm originally from. And my brother, he lives in Chicago now. He's actually in this week. We're actually scoring a documentary that my buddy's making, so he's in this week. But he lives in Chicago. He's been in Chicago since 2010. And the majority of like Power Assassin as a band, we exist in both places, but we're very much a Chicago-based band because that's where the majority. Yeah, that's where we get gigs. I mean, like there's an actual thriving music scene there. Like we played on Valentine's Day in Charlotte, and that was right before all this craziness went on. That was the last thing we did, but before that, the majority of the stuff that we did was in Chicago. So like we've got a little bit of a presence there. And it's, Matt, he lives there, so he's in this concentrated area, so he can shoot emails out and get responses right away from people. But we've got, our bassist, he's got family in Charlotte. We've got some people in Nashville. We can punch emails out to all of these places, and the only places we get a response from is Chicago because we've started to build this little thing. So we're on the road quite a bit, going back and forth. But it's really interesting, man. I mean, him living there, the fact that we get anything done at all is a miracle. We make it work. We make it work somehow. And I think it's because we've known each other for so long and it's so easy to jump on the same page with each other. I mean, if we had just started this, within like the last few years, there's no way you could keep that kind of thing together. There's too many obstacles. Like I'm a dad, my buddy Chuck, he's got a baby on the way and we still make it work. If you're passionate about it, man, you can make it work.
Yeah. Well, I was reminded, I don't know if you listen to the band Northtail, which is like a new power metal band. So these guys never played live until they played their first gig. They never played. They never were in the same room together until they started rehearsing. And they recorded. They weren't even on the same continent when they recorded the album.
So I didn't know that.
They decided to record this album, and of course, like Bill was in the States, and Christian was still in Sweden or somewhere, and he wasn't living in the U.S. at the time, and they just put the band together, and Bill had a lot of songs in mind, and then they started recording them and somehow passed the recordings around so that each person could do their part and do their contributions. And somehow an album came out of it, and they released it and people liked it. And then they toured. It's like, what a weird way to do it. But I guess you can do that now. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how can I do this? Because, you and I both know Jesse White, and he's like, man, I really want to do music with you. And he's a great metal singer.
Oh yeah, he's really good.
He's amazing. And I'm like, I really want to do some metal this year, but it's like maybe I'm too old school and I'm too used to sitting in a room with the drummer, like figuring out the songs. That's the way we always did it. It's like if I had me and my friend who was a drummer, that's all we needed once that core was there, it was like adding everybody else was easy because you could write the songs with just the drummer and a guitar player.
You've got the backbone. Yeah, you got the backbone of the song done. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly how Northtail rehearsed. It was Bill and the drummer started. They rehearsed all the stuff live, and then everybody else came in. So that, like, by the time Christian came in, it's like I was just singing the stuff on top of a band that was already super well rehearsed. Like, there's nothing to do.
That's the thing, man. I mean, if it hadn't been for the internet, I don't know where exactly we'd be. I mean, we have a Google Drive. I live in Virginia. Chuck lives in West Virginia, which is an hour from me. And my brother lives in Chicago. That's easily 9-10 hours away. So we have a Google Drive. Matt will write guitar parts. He'll add them to the Google Drive. I'll get them, or I'll write some things. And we just add stuff in the Google Drive. So like every other day, you go in and you check the Google Drive, and there's more things. And somehow at the end of all that, like, songs happen.
Yeah,
I don't
put
know
them together, and somehow they get arranged into something meaningful.
Yeah, and a lot of times we get to rehearse for maybe an hour to 2 hours the night before we play live. So we usually schedule a show. Chuck, if it's a Chicago show, which is the majority of what we do, we Chuck and I usually need 2 to 3 weeks notice, and we get there, and I actually tap it out on a pillow at Matt's apartment, and we get that as a rehearsal, and then we put it on stage the following night. It's pretty crazy.
So I know I wanted to address this question from chat because there's actually several different answers to this. How did recording get to be so expensive? Elvis paid less than $4 to record his first record. I think there's a lot of answers to this. So the first one is you pay more, you get more. Elvis's first record doesn't sound good in terms of quality, right? And the way they used to record stuff, like back when, I don't know, Louis Armstrong or someone was popular, is they had a big horn cutting a wax cylinder with a needle. So it was just like a vinyl, but in reverse. And then from that, you made a metal impression of it, and then you could press the vinyl. So there was no mastering process. These recordings sound like garbage compared to what came afterwards. So $4 to cut a wax cylinder, that's not that hard. The thing is, getting it to sound as good. It wasn't until the 60s when you started to get really good sounding recordings that really hold up to time.
And a lot of times, a lot of times these albums were recorded at the radio stations that they were broadcast from immediately afterwards. So like they're recorded by people that don't have any,
because the radio station had the microphones and the tapes and stuff to do it.
Yeah.
You know. So $4 a magnetic tape, played live with a couple mics up, and then you didn't there was no mastering process. There was nothing that you did afterwards. All that stuff came later. So you could record a bad sounding record for $4, but it becomes more expensive as you go.
Yeah.
Now the other answer is, and this is in that Steve Albini article, is that a bunch of the expense is basically bullshit. You know, back when it was like, it costs $1 million, $250,000 to record a record, let's say. I think to record the Black Album, it cost Metallica close to $1 million. And it sounds like $1 million record. You know, it sounds great.
Yeah.
They were in the studio for months. They had to rent that studio space for a long time. And of course, you have to pay premium if you're going to sit in a studio for months, because that studio is not getting any other use out of there. Yeah. You know, you're paying money to have somebody come in and set up the mics so that they sound warm. From Steve's perspective, that was all BS, you know?
Yeah.
Here's what he says. Producers and engineers who use meaningless words to make their clients think they know what's going on. Words like punchy, warm, groove, vibe, feel, especially punchy and warm. Every time I hear those words, I want to throttle somebody.
Because like, explain what that means. You got to explain what that means after you say that. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? He's like, I hate them. Producers who aren't also engineers and as such don't have the slightest effing idea what they're doing in a studio besides talking all the time. Historically, the progression of effort required to become a producer went like this. Go to college, get an EE degree, get a job as an assistant in a studio, eventually become a second engineer, learn the job and become an engineer. Do that for a few years and you could try your hand at producing. Now all that's required to be a full-fledged producer is the gall it takes to claim to be one. Calling people like Don Fleming, etc., producers in the traditional sense is akin to calling Bernie a shortstop because he watched the whole playoffs this year. Right.
Is this in that book?
Yeah, this is just that article that I linked.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in my book, but it's in Steve Albini's article. He produced In Utero. DAT machines, they sound like shit, and every crappy studio has one now because they're so cheap. This is before digital. Because the crappy engineers that inhabit crappy studios are too thick to learn how to align and maintain analog master decks. They're all using DAT machines exclusively. DAT tapes deteriorate over time, and when they do, the information on them is lost forever. I have personally seen tapes go irretrievably bad in less than a month. Using them for final masters is almost fraudulently irresponsible.
They're too thick.
Yeah. Trying to sound like the Beatles, you know.
Don't be
so they have a bunch of stuff.
Greg.
Like they have a guy who comes in and sets up the mics. It's like that guy's, it's a waste of money, you know. It's like everyone wants percentage points. But now people can record a record for like a couple of grand to buy the equipment necessary.
Yeah.
Not to hire a producer, to buy the equipment necessary. You can self-learn the techniques, and then it's really cheap. Or somebody has the equipment and it's really cheap to hire them. You know, it's super cheap to make a record now. $4, might cost $1,500 to record an album if you know what you're doing ahead of time.
Yeah.
Now, so it got higher and higher and higher because the industry, of course, everybody wants to get their beak wet in the industry too.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of it.
Well, $4. Let me say $4 in the 50s. What was it? $20 now?
Yeah, $25.
Like 15 minutes of recording time.
Yeah.
20 minutes of studio time.
Yeah.
We go to a guy in Bristol, Tennessee. It's called Sonic Design Studio, and he does 3 days, 10 hours a day for $500. And we went there. My brother and I went there with a metal band we used to have called Keep the Victim Warm back in 2007. We did 2 days with him then, and we're going there. We had scheduled to go there this month with Power Assassin, but obviously we got to push a few things back. But his name's Mike. He knows exactly what he's doing, man. It's real interesting. When I was 2007, I was a much younger drummer. We were we had that fever of like, oh my God, we get to hear our music recorded digitally. It's going to sound awesome. I didn't really know what I'm hearing. I listen to those songs now, and it's cool. It sounds a lot better than what I could do personally. But like, oh my gosh, man, there's the tempo issues, the leveling issues, the EQing issues.
Yeah.
There's so much going on with it. I'm really excited to get back and dig in and be a little bit more involved. And he and I have maintained a relationship over all these years too. So I'm excited to get involved and get my hands kind of dirty with it this time.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know, I could come up with a basic equipment list for people that are wanting to set that up, but you can get a decent set of monitors. And if you have them set up right, of audio monitors, if you have them set up correctly, you don't need $5,000 monitors. You just need monitors that cleanly replicate the sound that's there.
Yeah.
And then, you need a recording interface. Mine is probably overblown for what I need. I have a Scarlett 18i8. You can do it with like a 2-channel interface if you're recording track by track. I bought the 18 input one because I wanted to record drums sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the more mics you have on the drums, the better it is as far as I'm concerned. So,
no, that's true.
And I don't want to have to do any sub mixing. I don't want to have to mix down toms before I get them into the recording software. I like to have them available all at once. That way you can really get, because after you record something, there's always like a little flaw. You're like, man, tom number 2 is like a little too loud. And if it's a separate track, you can just kind of dial it down. Yeah. You had to live with that stuff in the 80s. You had to live with the snare sound wasn't right. But now you can just kind of, I'll just EQ just the snare,
Yeah.
And if it bleeds into the other mics, it's not a big deal because you're mainly doing that one sound right. You can also pan it right. I don't know. So I have an overblown one for what other people need. And you need a couple of good condenser mics. The one I'm using right now to talk to you is a Rode NT1A. I have a matched pair from forever ago when they were more expensive, but these are pretty cheap and they're really good. You could even record with like a Yeti USB mic. My Yeti sounds good on guitars. I recorded loop parts with it, you know. So some of the loop parts are Yeti is a Yeti mic.
Yeah, I've got a Blue here.
That's it. I recorded guitars with that.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I play a cajon on the album that we just released last year, and I recorded the cajon on the Yeti, and it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it actually sounds really good, and the drivers and everything in it are good, and it sounded. It has a bunch of different modes. You can have an omnidirectional mode and get kind of the room sound if you wanted.
Yeah,
so you can just get a mic like that, and an interface to plug your guitar into.
Yeah,
or whatever and a MIDI keyboard. You can get a MIDI keyboard for $50 that'll do 99% of what you need to do.
Oh yeah.
I have one that has like a bunch of other controls on it that I don't even use. So I mainly just need the MIDI. So
I mean, even
the keyboard parts.
Yeah, especially for demoing. I mean, even if you don't take it to the final stage, having that kind of thing for demoing is absolutely essential. Yeah. Man. You can just write constantly.
I talked to a guy from the band 1967 on the channel, and he still records. He still does all his pre-production stuff with Cool Edit Pro from like the early 2000s that ran on like a Pentium 3.
Yeah.
He's like, it's what we do. I record the demos on that and then take it to the studio and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, another one from Hardwick. I think the Bandcamp model is the best way to distribute music. It directly connects listeners with artists. I think it's a good way to distribute music.
Yeah.
But you're still working within an older system of asking people to buy a product of music, which they can honestly get for free. Like you can buy this on Amazon. You can buy the physical or the MP3s of this on Amazon. You can also buy the physical on Bandcamp, and I'll eventually mail it to you, maybe signed or something, right? I've had a couple people buy this from Bandcamp, I guess. More people buy the MP3s, and actually, I'll link it right now because right now you can get it for free. I forgot that I was doing this for this stupid. What do you want to call it?
The way you don't get demonetized. Yeah. I know you got to be careful with the terminology.
So yeah, you can totally get the digital album, name your price right now, which means you can get it for free. So I'll go ahead and link it in the chat for you guys. So you can get that for free right now if you want to just get the MP3s. So I can distribute stuff through Bandcamp. You can get I think there's 32-bit masters. You can get really good files. If you want really good high quality files, you can even hear the noise on my pickups on that first track. You crank it up, you'll hear you'll hear the 60 cycle hum on my old Strat because I'm using single coil pickups and they're not shielded or anything. It's just kind of really kind of old school sounding, but you're still doing this thing where you're asking people to pay for a product which they can get for free. And I think the newer thing is going to be neo patronage on some level, like people patronizing artists rather than artists trying to get people to buy albums and concert tickets and stuff.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to evolve towards that.
Yeah. Bandcamp's a cool platform. Like you're saying, I mean, you're still, once you get outside of like your mom and your aunt and your brother and your cousins and the folks that are, like, yeah, man, I'll give you $7 for that. That's cool because I want to help you out. Once you get outside of that, then once you get to people that don't know who you are, you're asking them to go through a few steps to find your music, and then they've got a paywall. So you got to take into consideration all those things as to where, like you're saying, I mean, if your album's on YouTube, more than likely they're going to go to YouTube. If you've got a really cool pitch, if you've got something tied in with Bandcamp, it could work out. I mean, we've done some stuff on Bandcamp before, and it is complicated once you get outside of your circle of people to get people to go in there and click through all that and find it and then pay $7 or $10, whatever you're charging for it. Yeah,
I agree. That's part of it. And then when thinking about patronage, the hard part about something like Patreon is just providing value towards that, because you want to provide the value directly, and that's kind of what we're trained to do. And it could be, it's like, well, rather than having you get the book for free on my Patreon, why don't you just buy the book, right? Yeah. Why don't you just buy the book or buy the album? And it's hard to know what else to offer. I saw Winter Sun. Actually, I'm wearing a Winter Sun shirt, I think. I saw Winter Sun opened up a Patreon. And of course, like, everyone was hating on them about it. They're like, you're opening up a Patreon. Where's the next album? And this and that. I'm like, I don't know, man. They're just trying to like pay their 50% taxes in Finland or whatever. Yeah. And they had to pay like half of all that money they crowdfunded to the Finnish government in taxes. It's huge. Holy
cow. Jesus.
Finnish taxes are high. And then their government's still collapsing from spending too much money.
Yeah.
That's what you get. My ex was a musician, and his band had to go through ridiculous amount of changes in their sound and music before they got signed, but they said no and have carried on themselves. Now I can answer this in a couple ways.
Yeah.
So I can kind of through hearsay reflect some experiences of some dudes that have made it that I know. And one of them is John Dolmayan from System of a Down, who's a guy. He's a friend of a friend. I used to hang out with him in Las Vegas. And when they were first working, they worked relentlessly hard on everything that they were doing. But when they were working with, who am I thinking of? The producer, he was Slayer's producer forever. Anyway, they were working with him, and they're like, we worked hard on this song, and we played it for him, and he just went, next. We're like, what? What do you mean next? He's like, next song. He's like, that one sucks. Play your next song. It's like, we had to throw out so much stuff that we thought was good because it just wasn't good enough. And when we were playing in front of a real producer, we just realized that most of our stuff wasn't that good, and we had to step it up. And the things that we were attached to weren't really good enough for prime time.
Yeah.
It was other songs we had to do.
Yeah.
And we had to do a ton of stuff in order to actually get good enough to come out with that first record.
Yeah. If getting signed is replying to Film Girl, if getting signed is the goal, you really got to shop labels, man. I mean, if and now of course, I say that, and if somebody comes along and they're wanting to sign you, yeah, you're going to get really excited. But chances are there's an label, even if it's
Rick Rubin.
As underground as it can possibly get. There's a label out there and a good example is I'm from West Virginia. A good example of this is Byzantine. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Byzantine. They're a heavy metal band from West Virginia. Actually, Lamb of God got them signed. They're from Charleston. Those guys have done exactly what they want to do, and I know this because I know OJ. I know the lead singer. They've done exactly what they want from day one, and they got on Prosthetic Records. They have never compromised their song whatsoever. And I say this because I've listened to this guy write these songs in his apartment. And by the time you get to the album, Nothing. There's zero influence here. So it just depends on really what you're wanting to do with your music. I think it's admirable to turn a record label down if they're just like, hey man, you got to change exactly what you're doing, or we're not gonna help you market, we're not gonna help you record your music or anything. That's admirable. If getting signed is the goal, shop, because there are labels out there. They might be underground, they might not be able to give you as much, but it's a foot in the door and it's an avenue.
Yeah. Now I'm reminded actually of some advice that Dave Ellefson from Megadeth gave regarding this. He's like times are different now, and young guys getting a 360 deal where it's like what Steve Albini's talked about, where they get a cut of like the merchandise and stuff, because it's really a raw deal now. It's like, it's not what we do. It's not what most people need to do. Maybe if you're really young and you're just starting in the business and you have no idea and you don't want to bother to do any of that, maybe it's okay to do that. But it's like, it's really better to look for a distribution deal, which is to say they print and distribute the album. So that that's their business, is getting the album out for people.
Yeah, because that's the hardest thing to do.
And that's really the thing that you can't do very well yourself. And then you can deal with all the merchandise stuff yourself. And that's how you can work on touring and building up your live business. And it's a better partnership for you, rather than having them put their finger in the live pie, which you're going to have to be doing all the work for anyway. Okay. So that was his recommendation, was like, you look for a label that is going to do the distribution side. And of course, with Megadeth records their own albums at this point. They don't, if Dave Mustaine wants to work with Andy Sneap, he just calls up Andy and says, let's come produce a record. Yeah. And Andy comes and does it. Yeah. So there's no middleman. It's not like, we got to wait for Elektra to find a producer or something. He could just do it and does it in his own studio. He's like, come to my house and we will record this. It's like, something like that. But I think for a lot of people, you can record the album on your own, or for very cheaply with an independent engineer. And then you can probably send those tapes to somebody who's very good at mastering. Like if you're going to go for that Nuclear Blast sound, you could totally send your tapes. There's a couple guys who do the mastering for Nuclear Blast. You could just pay them to master it. Yeah. And then you'll have that Nuclear Blast sound. They'll pump everything up. They'll put it through all the EQs and compressors you want to get that blasty, super maximized Nuclear Blast sound.
See, it would blow your mind, the number of artists out there that don't even know that they have that as an option. That's a real thing.
Yeah, that's like, I could just call up the guy who mastered. I'm trying to remember who mastered Death Magnetic. Death Magnetic is one of the worst production jobs. I mean, that's where I really was like, music sounds worse now than it used to. Like in terms of production, was when Death Magnetic came out, and I'm like, I can't even begin to give these songs a chance because the album sounds so bad in terms of its recording. Yeah. I thought Saint Anger was bad because that snare drum, but if you listen, if you can ignore the snare drum, which good luck, the album is really not produced badly. It's really not, except Lars wanted that snare drum sound. And if you, the guy who produced it was the same one who did all their stuff in the 90s, and he's really good at it. His name's slipping my mind right now,
he's real popular. I can't remember his name either.
He's great. I mean, he's a great producer, but I guess he just let Lars get his way on that snare drum sound.
Yeah, that's what happens when no one's around to tell you no, man. Like it's like you realize this sounds like you're smacking a trash can with a hammer, right?
Yeah, it's really bad. That. He's like, well, I got a snare. It's made out of pure cannon brass, melted down from an 18th century cannon. I put a cannonball in it on top of the snares, and I tightened them up with a Kevlar bottom head to 150 psi per wrench. Jeez. And then I loosened up the top so it was like a steel bowl, and that's the sound I wanted. I wanted to sound like a friggin' church bell.
I just imagine, like. Yeah. I just imagine what the rest of the guys thought. I mean, like, it's surely to God they weren't.
Yeah, it didn't even say like, "Hey, it's not going to work, dude."
Yeah. At some point, you're just like, I'm tired of fighting with you people. That's fine.
Yeah. So Jared has a point here. There's a lot of ways people make music these days. One, as long as one knows what they're doing, one can make beats to a song and release it. Yeah, you can just do everything like electronically, but it's never sounded right to me. Yeah. It's never sounded right to me when I hear that stuff that's just kind of like people layering drum loops on like Fruity Loops or something, it always sounds off to me. I think it's just they don't really know what they're doing. They're like, I like this, and they put it on the tape, and then they start going from there. And some other people like it because somebody who knew what they were doing made the drum loop to begin with, right? At some point. Yeah. But I don't do any pre-made loops with my recordings ever. I play or key in every single note. Yeah. And it's still pretty artificial because it's me playing with myself over and over again, but it's less artificial, I think, than doing what a lot of people do, which is pull out their drum loops in Fruity Loops or Ableton or something and call it electronic music.
Yeah, I mean, like you're essentially just putting together a puzzle at that point.
Yeah. I do remember the band manager find a label that took them on without compromising their sound, and they've done okay. Released a few singles. Just went through a few band member changes. That's always bad news when you're having to switch a lot of people out of the group.
Oh yeah.
But that's good. You want to be able to do what you want to do. I know Prince actually put off his first record. He refused to record it because they wouldn't let him produce it. He wanted like total control over the recording, and he was right to do that. Yeah. If you're Prince, I think you can get away with that.
Yeah.
Does the music industry have the same issues with in-group monopolies that Hollywood has? I think they probably do, but I think it's way better now than it used to be because things are more spread out. But it used to be pretty. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why grunge was never popular because people really loved it or it was good. It was just all the people in-group people decided to sign all these Seattle bands. If they were from Seattle, you were getting a contract. Yeah, that's how it works. Like once you had Nirvana and Soundgarden on it, everybody else was on the label too.
Yeah, well, that's why I was talking about. Saturation. I mean, it's also one of the strengths of the music industry now too. As crazy as that sounds, there's so much out there. You're guaranteed to find the stuff that you like, and when you find the stuff that you like, you should promote the crap out of it.
Yeah. I agree. So the last thing that maybe we can talk about before we go is just filtering, because this is the big challenge for musicians now is, and for listeners too, is getting through the filters. How do you get from it's playing over the radio at Applebee's to something that is good and you like? That's hard, right? Mm-hmm. And you can rely on YouTube channels. There used to be a number of YouTube channels dedicated just to like say metal album reviews. For whatever reason, YouTube really throttles those down.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of them, and it was kind of like the only people who watched them were people that were in the band.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're like, thanks for reviewing this. I'm like, thank you for watching. It's like,
appreciate it.
I really appreciate it because no one else even knows that these exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So YouTube throttles that down, and a lot of people had to quit doing that. So that filter's gone. All the magazines, of course, are gone. You have Metal Cucks that just hates metal. I mean, like, I've never seen a more ridiculous blog about a style of music that's more at odds with itself than Metal Sucks, aka Metal Cucks.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you guys don't like metal and you're doing bad things for it. It's like, what's with all these right-wing bands? It's like, metal's right-wing, bro.
It is.
What? No, but I'm not. It's like, you need to go listen to something else.
I hate to tell you, man. It's masculine. It's pretty masculine.
Yeah,
it is.
And that's how it goes,
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, there's like a strong right wing phenomenon with it. You can't look at like a Manowar album cover and go like, yeah, I could see these guys like, I could see that they're for like trans rights and stuff. It's like, no.
Yeah.
These guys are for like banging chicks and riding Harleys.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Yeah, exactly. Corvettes, heavy metal, flaming axes. That's it's an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic.
It's part of it. And that's a filter. That's a filter on it too. So I don't know where those filters are going to come in. YouTube has its algorithm that filters. Spotify has algorithms that filter. And actually, that's another thing I'll say is that when streaming music was becoming a thing, a lot of people in the industry were really excited because they're like, people are going to pay for music again. And they did. However, turns out that you don't really make a lot of money streaming. You make almost nothing. And the record company set it up so that they could get equity in the companies that were doing that rather than cash.
Yeah.
So the artists aren't really getting anything for it. And if somebody listens to your album one time, you can listen to my album on like Amazon Unlimited or whatever it is, right? You totally can. So if you go listen to it, I'll probably make like 3 cents.
Yeah.
And I'll probably never see it because it's just going to get eaten up in the flow of changing hands until the royalty check just doesn't appear. I probably won't get paid anything for it. Happy for you to listen to it, but I probably won't make any money on it. It's unfortunate.
I remember asking you a while back in terms of how you approach writing music, and I remember asking you, had you ever thought about writing like music to a book that you had written?
Yeah, I have some ideas towards that. I have some of these feelings like I want to record an album that's a soundtrack to a movie that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, could with character themes and motives and the whole bit. And that's kind of what Zool is in a way, but I just kind of want to take it to another level. Someone in chat was suggesting that I record a heavy metal soundtrack to the Berserk anime from 1997, the old Berserk anime, which is great. That'd be a lot of metal to write, though. But it's a place to start, though, because it gives you an idea of what you're doing. It's very intimidating to look at a blank page as a writer, which is why I never write unless I have an idea of what the book is going to be before I write any words. Yeah. Like if I can't open up a document, you're like, well, now I shall write a book. I'll be like,
oh, about what?
Yeah. And it's the same thing with music. I kind of have to have a feeling of what does this song want to be? Like at the very least, like, man, I want to write a metal song. I want it to be fast. I want it to have a riff. And then you can start writing. Like you have to have ideas in your mind for what you want it to be, or you write some words down. It's like, man, I want to write a song about Odin, like crushing someone's skull and eating their brains. That's where we go.
I mean, for me, it's really been within just like the last 5 years that I've really started thinking about melody. I've been such a rhythm guy for so long, and I've probably just with using like GarageBand on my phone and stuff, I've probably written the soundtracks to 4 or 5, side-scrolling, RPG games that will never exist.
Yeah. Yeah. I know people also ask like, why haven't you developed a game? I'm like, it's a lot of effort to develop a game and to do the learning necessary to do that.
Man.
And then to probably not make any money. That's hard. It's hard because like the indie game industry is really hard right now. Indie music's really hard. Nano Squid says like he started producing electronic music in his bedroom, but I have no ambitions of making money with it. He just put it out for people to listen to.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
What I think has to happen, if we're talking about neo patronage, is you just have to put it out for people to have. And then once you have established that, then you can come up with your patronage model for fans to interact with you, have access to you and your ideas and access to your more music or whatever you're going to want to do to monetize it. We're kind of in this weird space where you have to kind of monetize everything on the back end these days. And it kind of sucks, but I don't have a better solution to it right now.
Yeah. And it's not selfish to want to be paid for the work that you do. But to start out, I mean, you really do have to approach it in a very, very selfless way and just decide, I want as many people to hear me as possible. And then we can start talking about, hey, is this something that you would part with a few dollars for?
Yeah. And then at least maybe go see me live. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with if anybody's thinking of making video content like on YouTube, you just have to do it knowing you're not going to immediately make money on it. It's an investment in, it's a dice roll. And just look at it as a dice roll that costs you nothing. There's only upsides. The only thing it costs you is your time. Yeah. So that's how you have to kind of look at it. It's like, I want to make music because I want it to exist for its own sake. That's a great place to start. And then any money you make on it is just gravy.
Yeah.
That's kind of, I think that's a really good way to think about it.
It's a realistic approach. It's a very realistic approach.
Especially these days.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably going to be the case for anyone that wants to write a book too. You got to write it because you really want that book to exist. Worry about how to make money in this business later. That's going to come later. You got to start with just doing it.
Working through your motive for creating something has got to be the first thing you do. Before you, I mean, why are you doing this? What is the goal? And that is ultimately going to impact exactly what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Got it. I think that's a good place to start. You could do it for its own case. A good example is a recent benefactor of the YouTube algorithm, an artist named Sewersfeld, was making D&B and breakcore music not exactly popular for years and suddenly got promoted by YouTube. Yeah, you never know what's going to feed in, and people like it. And because they like it and engage with it, YouTube links up other people that have similar tastes and shows it to them. That's really how the algorithm works. That's the beauty of YouTube, is that it shows you things that you like. And the more YouTube gets away from that, but like trying to, like, anytime, I still haven't seen CNN pop up on my feed. I've seen it in the main page. If a CNN video pops up on my feed, I know that YouTube is broken at that point. Yeah. Because there's no way I would ever watch CNN. There's no way any algorithm would pump CNN videos at me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not the market for it.
Yeah. But, well, because you don't click down. I mean, even if you dislike it, I mean, it's
engagement.
You interacted.
So yeah. That's engagement. They're like, oh, you didn't like that one, but you clicked on the video originally. So clearly you want more videos like that.
Here's some MSNBC. Give them a shot.
Yeah. So that's what they do. So yeah, anyway, that's one of the great things about YouTube or anything else. There's always a dice roll. There's always a chance to like explode. You never know what's going to happen. And there's huge ranges of that. I mean, you could have modest success all the way up to super success. There's no limits. We're kind of in the extremistan of music, more so than ever before.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting going forward. So any other parting words before we get out of here?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm Twitter at Home Over Gold. Power Assassin is my band. We have an album called Against the Galaxy. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on Apple Music. I'm also, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm actually I'm launching a podcast totally dedicated to talking about heavy metal with a good buddy of mine named Todd Gillespie. So that's going to be coming here in the next few weeks. Yeah, that's about it, man. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. So thanks so much. And newest book you can buy Memories Adrift on Amazon if you want. So this is a fun album. Mostly me and a couple of guests. One of the weird ones called Transverse. I recorded after having cranial surgery. So that one feels like, and I have my friend Chad over who plays every instrument, but he wanted to make a bass only record, no guitar. So we just recorded a bunch of bass tracks. And we're like, let's make it sound like Sleep. And it came out not really sounding like Sleep, but we liked it a lot. You know, that's an example of some of the stuff I did on that.
After cranium surgery. That's awesome.
Yeah. I had this implant done in my head for a hearing aid. So anyway, it's a whole thing. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Michael, for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.